Good day to all our veterans. We honor you. To your families, our deepest gratitude. And to every one of you tuning in, welcome to Radio America. Today, we walk the bloodied sands of Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944, through the eyes of an anonymous soldier of the U.S. 29th Infantry Division. It is his voice that carries us through the smoke, fear, and unyielding courage of that fateful morning. Settle in, friends, and may this story stay with you long after the last word is spoken.
The sea was pitch black around us, and the only light came from the faint glow of red-filtered lamps below deck. I sat wedged between two guys from my company, knees tucked to my chest, the steel deck cold even through my uniform. The channel had been rough all night. Most of us were seasick. The guy across from me puked into his helmet an hour ago, then cleaned it out and put it back on. The chaplain said a short prayer around midnight. I didn't catch all the words, but the way he gripped the cross around his neck stuck with me. We checked our gear again. M1 Garand, extra ammo, life belt snapped tight, gas mask I didn't think we'd need, and the assault vest full of clipped grenades and rations. The engineers sat nearby, hunched over Bangalore torpedoes. No one said much, just the sound of boots shifting, gear clinking, and the wind cutting over the deck. A couple officers walked the rows, low-voiced, and bent over maps under red lights. I caught snatches of words. Dog green, easy red. Those were the sectors we were hitting, though nobody knew exactly what we'd find once the ramps dropped. The word going around was that we'd be up against second-rate German troops. That's what the briefing said. Foreign conscripts in static positions, poorly supplied, low morale. But we'd heard rumors that a tougher German unit, the 352nd Infantry Division, had been moved in. No one knew for sure. Didn't help that the sea was still tossing us around. I saw a guy from another squad tap the last letter to his wife into his pack. Real careful, right near the top. I'd already handed mine off before boarding, sealed with the same mix of hope and dread. I wasn't thinking about heroism anymore. I just kept going over what I'd practiced. Hit the beach, move forward, stay low, move forward. We were close now. The hum of engines tapered as the transport slowed. The ramp held steady, locked shut for the moment, sealing us inside. A few men smoked in silence, the glow of cigarettes, small embers in the dark. I was in the 116th RCT, part of the first wave hitting Omaha. I kept fingering the safety of my Garand, checking it again and again without realizing it. Word passed quietly. H-hour was near. Somebody near the front mumbled, 10 minutes. A hush came over the group, like we were all holding our breath underwater. I heard the clink of metal as the engineers shouldered the long shapes of the Bangalore torpedoes. We'd been told to expect light opposition. We wanted to believe it. But somewhere deeper, under all the training and the orders, the fear was real. None of us said goodbye. It was already too late for that. I was already awake by the time the order came. 0400 on the dot, still pitch dark. The sea grumbled beneath us, and in the distance we heard it. The low, steady thunder of naval guns opening up on the French coast. It didn't shake the ship, but it rattled something inside me. Above us, I caught glimpses of aircraft. C-47S flying in tight formation, dragging gliders or tossing paratroopers into the darkness inland. We were told the landings would begin at dawn, but it already felt like war had swallowed the night whole. Then came the call. One by one, we dragged ourselves topside, shouldering packs, rifles, and fear. In groups, we climbed down rope netting into the waiting LCVPs below. The ships rocked hard in the chop, the nets swinging wildly, and I could feel just how heavy everything was. Some guys slipped. The hardest part was pretending we weren't scared. Our Higgins boat, just one of many, bucked like a mule as the coxswain revved forward into the black waves. Every man on board was soaked within minutes, the chill biting through our uniforms. The sea was worse than expected, violent, confused. We couldn't see each other very well in the dark, but we could hear the cursing, the puking. Strong currents in the spray started to scatter the formation almost immediately. I heard the crewman say something about being pushed off course, too far east maybe. Nobody seemed certain. Above us, tracer fire flickered against the low clouds, distant but real. The big ships kept firing broadside salvos, 14-inch guns lighting up the horizon in flashes. You could feel it in your chest. We'd heard about the DD tanks, special Sherman tanks that could swim in, but nobody believed they'd survive this sea. I didn't know then that most of them wouldn't make it ashore at all. Just before first light, our coxswain got a final set of corrections by signal lamp. We adjusted again, heading toward what we hoped was the right strip of sand. Dog green, they said. The swells kept hammering the boat's flat hull, every slam a gut punch. I crouched low, gripping the bench, trying not to look anyone in the eye. Around us, other boats cut through the water, some crossing wrong, others lagging behind. It was chaos already, and we hadn't even seen the beach. Off our bow, the shore appeared faint and jagged, still lit by the shell bursts from the battleships. No tanks in sight, no cover, just a wide, open stretch of sand with God knows what waiting behind it. I remember thinking, not praying, just thinking, about whether I'd make it 10 feet past the ramp. Most of us had trained for this day for months, but nothing prepares you for going in blind. We were packed shoulder to shoulder in that steel coffin of a landing craft, heading full speed toward Dog Green sector. Dawn was only brushing the horizon, a faint orange smear behind us, as the silhouette of the Norman coastline slowly took shape ahead. My boots were soaked from the salt spray jumping off the waves, and the cold bit through every layer I wore. The diesel fumes from the engine clung to the back of my throat, and the front ramp rattled with each crash of the hull against the choppy surf. I'd been trying to keep my mind blank, but the closer we got, the more it hit me. The sea was alive with flashes. Mortar rounds began punching into the water around us, geysers of spray leaping like fists. Somewhere to starboard, an LCVP just disappeared in a bloom of fire and smoke, and men were already leaping overboard. Before I saw the beach, I heard the machine guns. Sharp, fast, steady. German MG-42S, firing from the bluffs up ahead. Somebody yelled tracer fire. And I saw their orange lines skimming across the water, skipping like stones before slamming into the surf. We weren't even on the sand yet. Our officers had told us the Navy and bombers were going to pulverize the defenses. But as we got closer, I saw that was a damn lie. The bunkers looked untouched. Strong points like WN-62 were still intact, belching smoke and fire. A few bodies floated between the boats, American uniforms, lifeless or too exhausted to swim anymore. A floating helmet knocked against our hull. Somebody next to me started muttering Hail Marys. The ramp buckled again harder. The coxswain bellowed, 30 seconds, down ramp, go, go, go! I could barely breathe. The beach looked like hell ahead, but the order was coming. We were nearly there. I looked over the edge of the craft and saw twisted wrecks of earlier waves, burning hulks of tanks, half-submerged jeeps, lifeless gear half covered by the tide. The tide was rising, and it carried more than water. Each wave pushed in more debris, more grim warnings. I told myself to get ready, that I had rehearsed this 100 times. But a voice inside me knew this was nothing like the drills. The closer we got, the more I saw that everything had gone wrong. Mortars arced in and slammed down ahead of us. I heard a medic shouting from an LCT already unloading men under fire. The coxswain pointed with his chin. The ramp was about to drop. I adjusted my chin strap, grabbed my rifle tighter, and tried not to look at the bodies in the surf. I braced myself. The ramp slammed down. Go, go, go! The boat stank of sweat and salt water. I was near the middle, wedged between a radio guy and a sergeant, trying to hide the tremble in his hands. As we neared the shore, the ramps ahead of us lowered in other crafts and were met by streaks of fire, like sparks off a grinder. I heard someone mutter a prayer, then ours slammed down. The water surged in fast, far deeper than I'd expected. The front men barely made a step before they were shredded. MG fire from what sounded like multiple guns, maybe from those concrete bunkers we'd been briefed about, cut them down in rows. The officer beside the ramp was hit square in the chest, tumbling back over us. Without thinking, I vaulted the side. Water swallowed me. My gear dragged me under, my rifle yanking at my shoulder. I kicked wildly, no direction, just away from the metal coffin that was our craft. I broke the surface, choking, sputtering, boots like concrete blocks on my feet. Around me, soldiers thrashed or didn't. Some just sank. I saw a helmet float past, but no one beneath. We'd trained for chaos, sure, but nothing like this. Mortar blasts were landing in the surf, columns of water and sand flung into the air. Bullets snapped past, tearing the water. A machine gun from higher up, the bluff maybe, swept left to right, then back again. The sound was constant. I tried to shed my pack, but couldn't get the straps loose fast enough. I dog-paddled through the waves, aiming for the beach, or anything solid. A sandbar, a body, anything. I finally hit bottom and lunged forward, crawling more than walking. Ahead, the high-water shingle, marked by tank traps and twisted metal, beckoned like a finish line. But there was no cover, not yet. Just open sand and death all around. I made it to the tide line, dragging myself beside a chunk of ripped tank tread that offered inches of shelter. Up the beach, the bluff loomed, bristling with muzzle flashes. There was a body slumped in front of me, face down, boots pointing toward the sea, a rifle still gripped in one hand. I pressed my cheek into the wet pebbles, breathing shallow. Commands were being yelled, but the surf and machine guns swallowed the words. I tried to find my squad, couldn't tell one man from another. Helmets bobbed, motionless. A few of us, maybe what was left of A Company, were huddled in shell holes in the sand, trading glances, waiting for a break, any break. And finally, the guns shifted, toward a new wave coming in. I saw one of our own stand and sprint for the next bit of cover, and without thinking, I crawled after him. It had begun. We hit the beach before the sun fully broke the horizon, and already it was a nightmare. The ramp dropped, and machine guns opened up, raking the surf, shredding us before we even got waist-deep. I threw myself onto the wet sand, my rifle dragging behind me, muzzle caked in salt and grit. The air was filled with shouting, screaming, and the sharp crack of rifles, an MG-42S. Ahead of us, steel obstacles, Czech hedgehogs, tank traps, rose out of the surf like jagged shark fins. A few guys got tangled in barbed wire, barely visible, under patches of foamy tide. Explosions rocked the shore, sending sand and smoke skyward. I crawled behind a hedgehog as bullets snapped over my head, trying to orient myself, but all I saw was chaos, figures scattered, some never getting up. This wasn't a beach landing, it was a death trap. And we were right in the middle of it. Pinned down behind a shallow shingle bank, barely higher than my boot, I tried to breathe through the choking smoke and stench of cordite. Every time I lifted my head, German machine guns scythed the air. Their nests were dug into the bluff like eyes staring down at us, interlocking fields of fire covering every beach exit. Mortars whumped behind the lines, and sniper fire cracked with deadly precision. I stayed low, pressing flat as the bullets whipped past. Medics darted across the sand, risking it all to reach the wounded. I saw one kneel over a man, screaming through torn webbing, jabbing in a morphine syringe and scribbling an M on his forehead with a grease pencil. Somewhere to our west, I heard men talking about the Rangers at Pointe du Hoc, scaling cliffs under fire. I couldn't see them, but the thought of it chilled me. No one was where they were supposed to be. Units were scrambled, and we were barely holding on. The beach felt eternal, just sand and blood and steel. But slowly something shifted. Officers and NCOs, whoever was left, began barking commands. Small bands of men, 1st Division, 29th, jumbled together, started to move. Some blew Bangalore torpedoes against the barbed wire, clearing narrow gaps. Others fired blind at the bunkers, hoping to keep the gunners' heads down. Behind me, naval shells finally started hammering the bluffs, louder, closer. Dirt and stone spewed from German positions as the hillside shook. One group crawled past me and huddled at the seawall, then sprinted toward exit E1. Most didn't make it, but a few disappeared into the smoke beyond the wire. I remember gripping my rifle tighter, nodding at the man beside me. I didn't know his name. It didn't matter. We'd either die here together or somehow claw our way forward. Ain't no training prepared us for this, but we weren't going to die on the tide line. At around 7 o'clock, the beach had turned into a killing ground. The tide kept pulling at our boots as we tried to move forward, crouched low behind anything with a shadow. The engineers started crawling out with their bangalores, thin tubes packed with explosives, trying to breach the miles of barbed wire. I saw one guy drag a bangalore forward inches at a time, bullets snapping inches from his helmet. He got close to the wire, stretched forward to jam it underneath, and just like that, he was gone. Some charges did go off, sending up clouds of black sand and wire fragments. A few gaps opened, but they were barely wide enough for a man at a time, and didn't matter much if no one could get through alive. We were too exposed. There was little cover, and our own rifles couldn't reach the bunkers. The MG-42S didn't care who you were. They just kept ripping us apart. I crawled through wet craters toward the seawall, where bits of wrecked timber and tank hedgehogs offered a place to breathe. Orders flew in all directions. Some shouted to fall back to the waterline. Others screamed to charge. It was chaos. A few duplex drive tanks from the 743rd had made it ashore further down, and I watched one firing at a German position above us before it burst into flames. But at least for a few seconds, that gunfire gave us movement. A small group dashed toward a gap in the wire. Not all made it. Still, a few got through and hit the sand beyond. Mortars were bracketing everything, shrapnel whizzing past like angry hornets. I saw a buddy try to drag a wounded man from the surf, only for both to go down in a snap of fire. We weren't making progress. We were surviving. Some were clinging to the beach, others refusing to die lying down. Then, just when it felt like everything might collapse, we heard the roar offshore. Naval destroyers, real close ones. USS Satterlee and others began hammering German emplacements from point-blank range. I remember ducking as their shells screamed over our heads, hitting targets up on the bluff. That fire drew some heat off us. It was terrifying, but it bought seconds, and seconds felt like miracles. A sergeant ran toward us, waving his arm, rallying a handful of us into the gap one Bangalore had blasted. He stood straight up, screaming, "Go now!" and somehow lived. I followed, stumbling through bloodied sand, trying not to think. We reached the base of the bluff where the fire didn't come as direct. Behind me, more guys followed in twos and threes. We weren't safe, not by a long shot, but we weren't stalled on open beach anymore. Something had shifted. We weren't being pushed back into the sea. Not yet. By mid-morning, I was still crouched behind a twisted chunk of beach obstacles, the sand around me churned into muddy paste by the constant shelling. The sun had clawed its way above the smoke, and I could see the carnage more clearly now. Wrecked landing craft, gear scattered across the stones, and wounded crying out behind the shingle bank. The noise felt like it was wearing me down to the bone. Our officer, or maybe just an NCO, I couldn't tell anymore, crawled over beside us, half covered in muck, and shouted that we were moving. Forward. Staying meant dying. He pointed toward a patch of smoke drifting left along the beach. We began belly crawling through the shingle, edging toward what looked like a narrow cut in the bluff near some bluffside ruins. A few engineers had blown a gap in the wire, and something about the terrain there seemed different, less defended. We hoped. We hugged the low ground, clumps of us moving laterally behind the stone breakwater and into the narrow draw the NCO had spotted. German rounds still snapped overhead, but there were fewer machine gun nests covering this spot from above. Maybe their ammo was running low, or their angles were bad. It didn't matter. It was our chance. As we reached the base of the draw, the terrain shifted beneath us. Wet, churned mud, steep inclines, and broken grass leading up the bluff. The path was littered with barbed wire and shattered logs, remnants of obstacles blown apart by explosives. I followed the man in front of me as we climbed, one short rush at a time, diving into craters and folds in the hillside. The higher we went, the more fire rained down. Rifle cracks, bursts from MG-42S. Even grenades arcing down like tumbleweeds in reverse. We kept moving. No choice. At one point, I lost sight of the NCO. Smoke and dirt blasted up from somewhere behind, and I just kept crawling, my boots slipping in mud slicked red and brown. Ahead, behind a hedgerow, one of us signaled. A gap. A rut in the hill that flattened out behind a collapsed trench line. My ears were ringing too loud to hear much, but as I reached him, I could see a short trench running crosswise, probably German-made, empty now. We spilled into it, gasping, mud-covered, clutching our rifles like lifelines. We weren't safe, but for the first time since stepping onto that beach, I could stand without being exposed. The firing behind us hadn't stopped, but we had broken through that first layer. A few more came up behind us. We were inside the German defenses now, just barely past the wire, up the slope. The bluff was almost ours. After clawing my way up the bluff, I linked up with a small group of guys, mostly stragglers from different platoons. Didn't matter anymore what company we were. We'd made it off the beach, and now we were pushing through the grass and hedgerows behind the ridge. The slope sheltered us from the machine gun still raking the sand behind us, but up ahead, trouble was stitched into the earth. Concrete bunkers, Tobruk pits, and fixed gun emplacements pointing toward the sea. The Germans hadn't expected us to come from behind. We moved low, crouching between irrigation ditches and shell craters, peering up at the backs of the bunkers. One of the guys had a satchel charge, another managed to dig out a smoke grenade. We'd learned quick. Angle around, flank left or right, hit the back door. That's how we started clearing one by one. Close, dirty fighting. No rules, only angles. We hit a position tucked into a rise, possibly WN62 or something like it. Sloped concrete, wide slit facing the water, half buried in the hill. I crept up one side while another guy laid covering fire. I saw a boot behind the gun shield, then lobbed a grenade through the firing slit. The bang was muffled by the thick walls, but smoke whispered out after, and the screaming stopped. Some of the defenders were kids, scared stiff. Others, older men, veterans maybe, fought like nothing else mattered. After we cleared the casemate, we pushed on a mortar pit behind it. This time we flanked hard left, moving under the cover of hedgerows. We caught them while they were reloading. It was fast. Brutal. We even found an MG-34 and turned it around, firing back at another post, pinning some of our boys behind rocks. No, couldn't see who gave orders. Didn't matter. We moved if someone stood up and pointed. By late morning, we were just bodies in motion, moving bunker to bunker. No name tags, no units, just guys left standing. At one strong point, a forward observer finally re-established radio contact. He called in naval fire, and within minutes, USS McCook answered. The shells came screaming, struck just below the crest. The concussion knocked us back, but it shattered whatever spine that position had. Some Germans ran, others came out hands raised. We didn't cheer, just shoved past, rifles ready for the next one. By then we could hear heavy guns moving out to sea, American destroyers laying fire closer and closer to support our push. Smoke curled around the shattered concrete. I remember spotting a helmet lying in a crater, still steaming. No one I knew. Didn't stop. We finally had momentum. No formation, no ceremony. Just clearing paths with steel and instinct, grinding inland inch by inch, while the roar of the ships covered our breath. By late morning, the chaos on the beach began to shift. I don't know exactly when it happened, but we saw more men making it up the slope, and the sound of machine guns started to die in spots. Some of the German strongpoints had either gone quiet or were being attacked from the rear. Engineers behind us had bulldozers working, the roar of their engines cutting through the rattle of gunfire. They were clearing obstacles, pushing through minefields like the one that nearly got us earlier. A few tanks had made it off the sand, their treads chewing gravel as they climbed the bluffs sluggishly. I saw medics dragging wounded out of craters into makeshift aid stations at the base of the slope. The tide wasn't just rolling in anymore. It felt like we were finally starting to push back. Inch by bloody inch, we were carving out a place on this horrible shore. Once we cleared the bluff, the land changed. Gone was the wide-open beach. We were now pushing through farmland, hedgerows, and sunken lanes that looked like something out of a postcard, if not for the gunfire. Fields were marked by shattered fences and the occasional burnt-out cart. We moved cautiously, 2 or 3 men at a time, covering each other down narrow paths where the enemy could hide behind every bend. Sometimes we'd find a few Germans holding out behind a stone wall. Other times we came across groups surrendering, shaking, nearly kids. The resistance wasn't solid anymore. It came in waves and pieces. One farmhouse had taken a direct hit. Its roof caved in, chickens running wild. Through it all, officers and radio men started showing up more often, issuing new orders, herding combat groups together. You could feel structure returning. Not fully, but enough to tell us this wasn't another Anzio. We weren't going back into the sea. By mid-afternoon, we all knew. The beachhead was holding. It wasn't glorious, but it was real. A few more exits had been cleared, and now Shermans were grinding inland, using the same dirt tracks we had crept through hours earlier. Artillery crews had manhandled their guns up the bluffs, and I heard their fire landing somewhere ahead of us, toward Colville or Saint-Laurent. Wounded were still being carried back by stretcher teams, some down the same trails we were advancing on. I remember passing one medical post with a white sheet flapping loosely over a tent frame and a medic's muddy hands holding a bloodied bandage like he didn't even see us walking by. Our battalion CP had set up near a wrecked barn, and I watched an officer pacing with a radio receiver in hand, barking into it in bursts. We didn't have much, but we had something now, a toehold. And that meant we were staying. By the afternoon, the roar of machine guns and mortars began to fade in our sector, replaced by the dull thud of distant artillery and the nervous shuffle of boots on loose sand. We'd pushed far enough inland to start digging in on a shallow rise overlooking the beach. The ground was still soft and damp, but we didn't complain. Every shovel of dirt gave a tiny piece of safety. I helped a buddy deepen a foxhole behind a tangled hedge, while the medics passed nearby with stretchers. The air was heavy with smoke from busted tanks and brush fires smoldering behind us. No one spoke much. We were waiting for the counterattack we'd been promised would come. Tanks, maybe, or German infantry sweeping down from the hills, but so far, all that came was wind and the cries of the wounded. That silence felt more haunting than the gunfire had. I stood up from our position and looked back toward the beach. From here, the scale of the morning's chaos hit me like a brick. The shallows were still littered with half-sunken LCVPs and knocked-out Sherman tanks, some burning, others just sitting there, cold metal coffins. Smoke curled off the wrecks, drifting slowly out to sea. On the sand were dotted rows of ponchos laid over the fallen, while medics and chaplains moved among them. I'd heard from one runner that whole companies from the 116th had been wiped out in the first waves. Dog Green had turned into a killing zone, almost no one making it off that stretch alive. Another guy said the Rangers had taken Pointe du Hoc, but were surrounded up there, holding out with barely any ammo. Reinforcements were still coming ashore even now. More men, more gear, more war, but it felt like the beach was swallowing them all up. That evening, the shelling started again. Sporadic, mostly from German guns we hadn't silenced yet further inland. But still, no major counterattack in our sector. Maybe they were regrouping, maybe just stunned we were still here. I huddled in our foxhole, eyes scanning the tree line ahead, ears tuned to every distant rustle. Our objectives for the day, reaching Bayeux, pushing up to Isigny, hadn't been met. We hadn't gotten far at all, but we weren't driven back into the sea either. We held the line at Omaha, decks blood-soaked and boots caked in gray mud. That mattered. It was a cost I could see in the faces around me, in the silence between us. D-Day hadn't ended as a clean victory, but it was a foothold, bought inch by inch. For me, for all of us on that beach, June 6th would never be about glory. It would be about survival. And it would be the longest damn day of our lives.
And that's where we'll leave it tonight, folks. From all of us here at Radio America, thank you for listening, and to our veterans, your sacrifices will never be forgotten. You're the heart of this great nation's story. If you found something meaningful in today's broadcast, consider subscribing. It's a quiet way to help keep the memory alive. Until next time, stay proud, stay kind, and keep the dial right here on Radio America.